Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show, News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM, KFYO. The Texas Legislature is meeting, and there's been news every single day out of Austin. And joining us to talk about some of that news, the editor of QuorumReport.com, our good friend Scott Braddock. Scott, welcome back. How are you today?
Doing well, Chad, and much better than you are, where you have, I think, a wind chill of, did you say 12?
Yeah, 12 degrees.
Oh, wow.
It's a little chilly.
Just looked at the Lubbock weather on this site. It says feels like 19. 55 right now in Austin.
Oh,
so,
okay.
Better than, despite the zebra mussels, despite the scooters on every corner, still a little warmer here. I'll take it.
Yeah, and didn't y'all get to like 91 last week? A little taste of summer.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. People, started barbecuing in the backyard, and
you got blue bonnets going up.
Yeah, but suddenly frozen out again on the weekends. So
yeah,
they have to stop.
It happens. Well, we've got a lot happening down in Austin, and let's go back to last week. And one of the things that I guess came out last week is you're starting to at least get rumbles of this paid sick leave ordinances that I believe Austin has one and some other cities have one, and we're now seeing some pushback from state lawmakers, correct?
Yeah, and this fight has actually been brewing for about a year or so. Last year you had Austin pass an ordinance that says that for private employers they have to offer paid sick leave to their employees, and there are a couple of questions about this. It's sort of a new frontier to have local governments get in the way or get in between, I should say, the employer and employee relationship. Not something that's been done previously in Texas, for sure. Austin was the first city in the South to do this, and there have been some other cities around the country to pass this. What it says exactly is that businesses have to give 1 hour of sick time for every 30 hours worked up to 64 hours. Long and short of it is that if a business is violating this, they could face fines of up to $500. So there was a business fight. The Texas Association of Business, NFIB, which is, of course, representing small business, and some other groups, took Austin to court to try to block this. And, of course, you had various rulings and the plea now from businesses to Republican lawmakers to basically preempt this. You remember when, in the last few years, the lawmakers did the same thing.
Right.
When it came to Uber regulations, the ride-sharing regulations,
yeah.
Where basically the argument with that was, and I think you could make the same argument here, although I haven't really heard it as much from some of the lawmakers who are pushing this just yet, but what they argued when it came to ride-hailing or ride-sharing was that you don't want to have a patchwork of different rules for the way all that should work all across the state. And in this instance, you have the governor himself coming out and saying that actually government should not mandate this at all. What he said at a luncheon last week, NFIB had their luncheon at the Sheraton in downtown, and he said that for a lot of businesses, it's a great strategy to have paid sick leave, and it can be a great recruiting tool, but his quote was, it should be exactly that. It should be an option chosen by the business based on their strategy of what they want to do as opposed to a government mandate. Now, the cities, and you mentioned Austin, San Antonio also has a similar ordinance, and I think they were looking at one in Dallas as well that would be basically the same thing, but I think they've held off in the meantime while this fight is playing out. And who knows exactly how this is going to go. I wouldn't say it's for sure a slam dunk that, that the Republican push on this is going to be successful, although I think they're a little more unified than they've been against some labor issues in the past. But look, the folks at the city level say that if you want to have a healthy workforce, then one thing you need to do, and they say it's good for the economy to have people who are not sick coming to work, and so anything you can do to foster a better environment in that regard is a good thing. But I do think that the Republican-led legislature is going to probably, and I don't make predictions, but probably side with business on this.
Okay, so how would this, distraction-wise, from the big issues, how big of a distraction would this be?
Not sure if it's a distraction, although it's a great question. The real issue when it comes to a 140-day legislative session is bandwidth. How much bandwidth do the lawmakers have to do certain things? And that's one of the reasons that I think that I'm sort of sounding cautious here about whether something like this can pass, something that would basically ban these ordinances at the local level, is because the two main things that we've talked about week after week here, the property tax issue and the school finance issue, those are both very, very heavy lifts. And so in a 140-day session, they're going to try to address those things for sure. Those are things that the governor designated as emergency items and top priorities in his State of the State address. This is something that the governor is behind. It's something that he certainly supports, but he didn't list it as one of his top priorities, so we'll see how far it gets.
Visiting with Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. The governor also weighing in on the role politics needs to play in judicial elections. I think surprising some people on this one.
Yeah, interesting. So the governor came out over the weekend and on Twitter, and I had long said, Chad, that it's not the lieutenant governor, Dan Patrick, who is the most like Trump. I've always thought it was Abbott who's most like Trump because one reason he chooses to speak and come out on things on social media, on Twitter.
Yeah.
That's not been the tradition of the lieutenant governor as much. Who's more of a traditional media guy. TV and radio is his thing. But the governor came out on Twitter over the weekend and said that we need to basically divorce partisan politics from the way that judges are elected. And, we're one of the states where this is the way it's done. Judges run as Republicans or Democrats. And, in large counties like Harris County, for example, where Houston is, this is a real issue because, look, in Lubbock County, I'm not sure how many judges are on the ballot. It's nowhere near the almost 90 judges that are on the ballot in Houston.
Right.
And so, remember when the legislature was arguing about the one-punch straight ticket voting? You could hit that button, and you're either voting for Republicans or you're voting for Democrats. And the philosophical argument is sort of easy on that, right? You say, well, hitting that button is easier than thinking.
Right.
But the fact is that in those large counties, like Harris County, Dallas County, and a couple others, being either a Republican or a Democrat, flying under that flag or wearing that partisan jersey, it actually means something. If you're a Republican, that means you're going to be a certain kind of judge. Or if you're a Democrat, that means you're going to be a different kind of judge. And as you see those large counties start to turn on their political axis, and I'm speaking specifically about Harris County and Dallas County right now. Dallas County basically is lost for Republicans just about. I mean, you saw Republican lawmakers in Dallas County just get firebombed there politically in the last election. In Houston, basically the same thing. They've gone just about full Democrat there in Harris County. And it is a question of what the parties want to accomplish with this. It's not suddenly that Republicans sort of came to Jesus about the idea that it's just wrong to push that one button and be able to vote for all Republicans or all Democrats. It's that they see that structurally that no longer benefits the party. And by the way, the Democrats do this too. It was like the parties just sort of flipped places on the issue.
Yeah.
Switch positions. And what do you know? There's gambling in this establishment. These folks are going to act in their own self-interest. And when it comes to the judicial races in Texas, it's just a fact that in the last election, you saw Democrats pick up seats on the bench, particularly in Houston and some other places as well. There were also some Democratic gains here in the Austin area. And those districts are drawn for those judicial seats. They gerrymander those, so to speak. We've talked about it before, where the Republicans will try to optimize those districts for partisan advantage on their side, and of course there's also Democratic districts. Democrats do the same thing in states that they control. Those districts that the judges run in are what I would say are the least gerrymandered districts. And so if Democrats want to make up ground here in the year 2020, they would really focus a lot of their resources on those judicial races because those are going to be some of the easiest ones to pick up, especially in a presidential year. But, it could be that in this legislative session, there could be some changes the way all that's done. We'll keep a close eye on it. I think that this is sort of in its nascent stage right now, but I can tell you that there are some big business interests that are very interested in this because obviously when it comes to civil cases, Republican judges are more sympathetic to the case of business than to the plaintiff's bar. Well,
and I've just, again, you look at this, and I've heard some Republicans who have said that it was a mistake to get rid of, the hitting that button and saying, I've heard some Republicans who say,
sure,
this is going to backfire. This is not a good idea. We wish we could have, stopped this.
Mm-hmm.
I would think the same thing for some Republicans and some Republican judges who would look at this and go, this doesn't sound good, because for a lot of voters, and you know this, whether it's a good thing or not, there are going to be a lot of people who turn out to the polls who just go, I don't know who these people are when voting for a judge, but I know if they're a Republican or a Democrat, which way they may lean. And that might be the only reason they vote for that person.
And that's the counter-argument to this idea that it's, quote, unquote, easier than thinking when you just hit that button. I mean, when you have more than 70 judges on a ballot, as they do in Houston, it's just not possible for people to know who all of those folks are. And so, again, running as a Republican means something, or running as a Democrat means something. I would also say that this is an indicator of Texas being a more urban and suburban state, and that the leadership thinking more about that than the folks in the rural areas. One of the key pushbacks to changing the one-punch straight-ticket voting in the last legislative session was from Republican county party chairmen, especially in smaller counties, who basically were telling lawmakers, look, you can't go changing that, the one-punch Republican thing, because that's our whole campaign in the fall. That's exactly what we tell people to do, is support Republicans over Democrats. As the shift happens, where the leadership is more focused on things that are happening in Houston, in Dallas-Fort Worth, here in the Austin area, and San Antonio, rather than places like Lubbock in South Texas and Deep East Texas and places like that, you may see some changes on this front as far as whether they're going to say that these judges should be elected in a nonpartisan way. The other thing we should point out about this is that it's possible that the final legislation that could be passed on something like this, if it does come to pass, is what they would call appointments with retention elections, which would be where the governor or someone else. There have been some proposals to do sort of local or regional advisory committees that would come together and decide, maybe who should be the judges appointed to some of these courts. But if the governor is appointing these judges and then they stand for re-election in nonpartisan fashion, that would mean that his appointments would be harder to dislodge, because they would have the advantage of incumbency. And if that's the way it turns out, Chad, one irony would be that under a proposal like that, it would mean that what leadership is saying is the governor is smarter than the voters, which is the exact opposite of what leadership is arguing when it comes to property taxes, that the voters are the smartest of all and they should decide what the rates are on their property taxes.
Visiting with Scott Braddock, editor of Quorum Report. A couple more things that I want to get to real quick. The fetal heartbeat bill in the House. What is that looking like right now?
Well, these bills have been passing around the country. I think Ohio has led the way on this, and some other states as well. The fetal heartbeat bill is a pro-life bill or anti-abortion, depending on how you look at it. Basically, the short version is, if the heartbeat can be detected, then the abortion is not legal. This, basically bans abortion for all intents and purposes. Briscoe Cain, who is basically sort of a Freedom Caucus, Tea Party-style lawmaker out of the Houston area, filed this bill, and if you look at the support for the bill so far, there are more than, I'm looking at the list now, more than 40 co-authors, and it's not just the sort of more right-leaning Republicans. It's a broad cross-section of folks who I would say are maybe some more moderate to what I would call mainstream conservative lawmakers who are supporting this. And, just from a political standpoint, it's been interesting that the Speaker of the House, the new Speaker, Dennis Bonnen, has said that he wants to keep things focused like a laser on property taxes and on school finance. But he has at the same time said that if there are proposals that can garner enough votes to come to the floor of the Texas House, then he's basically not going to get in the way of those things, even if they might be, some more red meat conservative kind of pieces of legislation. So I would keep a close eye on this, and of course we certainly will.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of those issues that, because of what's happened in New York and Virginia, puts a lot more focus on a bill like this, right?
Absolutely. And look, I was telling business groups and other groups as well, leading up to the legislative session, that if they think that this session is going to be devoid of social issues, they're just not right. I mean, if you look at the vast majority of the Republican lawmakers who are in the House and Senate, they still really don't have to worry about a general election challenge from a Democrat. There are some, particularly in the suburbs now, who do have to worry about that. You know, for years and years in covering Texas politics, all that the Republican lawmakers would have to worry about is a challenge from their right, so they keep an eye over their right shoulder, hoping that they don't get a challenge in their primary. But there are some lawmakers now who have to also look over their left shoulder because they might have a serious challenge from a Democrat in the fall. But the reality is, for the vast majority of Republican lawmakers, and they still hold the majorities, of course, in the House and Senate, they only have to worry about their primary, and that means when these sorts of votes come in front of them, they're probably going to go what I would call the more conservative route.
Yeah. Real quick, before we let you go, Scott, any news on the property tax bill?
We will keep a close eye on it. Of course, that bill came out of the Property Tax Committee in the Senate. Haven't seen a hearing set yet in the House for their version of it. Chairman Dustin Burrows is having an organizational meeting this week in the Ways and Means Committee. But on the Senate side, we'll continue to try to figure out if they have the votes to bring it to the floor. My latest reporting on this, my sources indicate that they do not, that after changes were made in the committee, that the support for this is around 15 or 16 senators in the Senate, and of course, as we've talked about, it takes 19 senators to bring it to the floor, so we'll keep a close eye on it.
Now you brought up the idea of passing this or getting it to the floor in a different way last week, right?
Yes, sir. There is a chance of a sort of nuclear option in the Texas Senate, which would be to try to move the bill with only 16 votes, which can be done without getting down into the weeds of exactly how that works. It basically means throwing out some traditions in the Texas Senate to try to move it, with 16 votes. Although that would cause, I think, two things: one, a revolt in the Senate, and two, it might mean that the bill would have to again be changed to even get it to the floor with 16, because, as I mentioned, my reporting says the support for it right now may be about 15 votes in the Senate.
Yeah. All right. Well, which you can even do the nuclear option on that one. Right. Scott, tell folks how they can find out more information on what you guys are up to over at Quorum Report.
Absolutely. To keep up with what's happening at your Texas Capitol, just go to quorumreport.com. It's quorumreport.com. And for your listeners, I'll offer a free trial subscription. If they go to the website and they click on subscriptions and just choose the Bill Me option, we'll give them a free month. And if at the end of that month they don't want to pay, if they're not hooked, that's fine. But we will cut them off because we're ruthless capitalists at quorumreport.com.
Very nice, Scott. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chad. The pleasure's all mine.
Follow him on Twitter, by the way, at Scott Braddock.